You're in Babylon in the 6th century before the Common Era, under Nebuchadnezzar the Second, in a city held together with fired brick and fear. The Euphrates slides past the walls, slow and dark, torchlight breaking on the surface like smeared bronze. The air tastes of smoke, river mud, and bitumen, the black tar pressed between bricks to hold back the flood. Oil lamps flicker in doorways while sandals scrape over packed earth and merchants shout over restless goats in their pens. Above you, palace walls rise in stacked platforms and temple towers cut into the night like man-made cliffs. Somewhere inside this capital, a garden's supposed to hang in the air like a green mountain. And the question won't leave you alone. Did the hanging gardens really stand here in Babylon? Or are you chasing a story that got too famous to die? So, let's open the file. Here's the version everyone thinks they know. Nebuchadnezzar builds a terraced paradise so high and so dense with life, it looks like a hillside ripped from another land and nailed into the sky. The story says he does it for a queen who misses the mountains of her homeland, turning Babylon into a copy of her memory. It's romantic, it's cinematic, and it makes a conqueror feel almost human. But the moment you try to pin it down, the legend starts slipping through your hands. You're still in Babylon, roughly 605 to 562 before the Common Era. In a world where news moves by courier and riverboat and history stabbed into wet clay with a reed. This isn't a world that forgets how to keep records. Temples track barley rations. Workshops track timber and copper. Palaces track labor crews like their tools, and kings track glory because a king who builds wants the world to hear about it. Here's your first pressure point. If Nebuchadnezzar built a wonder loud enough to echo across centuries, why won't Babylon shout it back to you in one clean line? That doesn't mean the gardens weren't real. It means this case opens with something dangerous, a famous claim without a clear local signature. You're in a time and place where the clay remembers almost everything that matters. To keep this sharp and not sloppy, you treat it like a real investigation. You move layer by layer through legend, evidence, and the best explanation that can carry both at once. First, you sink into the legend layer, the part people keep repeating because it hits a nerve. Picture a queen stepping through Babylon's gate for the first time, swallowed by flat land, heat haze, and brick walls that hold the sun like an oven. She misses cold air, pine, slopes, and green that grows on its own. Nebuchadnezzar sees that homesickness and refuses to lose to geography. He orders a mountain built out of terraces, soil hauled upward in wicker baskets, trees imported as trophies from far away. He makes water climb and forces leaves to live where leaves should have burned. You can feel why that story survives, because it isn't really about gardening at all. It's about power pretending it's love. It's about the fantasy that wealth and ego can manufacture a piece of another world on demand. But now you've got to face the part the legend wants to skip. A hanging garden isn't a poem. It's physics. You're still in Babylon, with the Euphrates at your feet and the palace district guarded by men with spears and hard eyes. If the garden stood here, they had to stand on something that could take crushing weight. Soil's heavy, stone's heavy, trees are heavy, especially when they're full-grown and constantly soaked. Stacked terraces high, and you need deep foundations, thick supporting walls, and endless repairs, because wet structures crack whenever time gets a grip on them. Then you meet the real monster in this story, because water has to rise. Babylon can build walls that swallow armies and temples that look like stairways to the gods, but a living garden doesn't run on pride. It runs on water showing up every single day. Picture the daily grind behind the beauty. Ropes and buckets, wooden frames creaking, hands rubbed raw on wet fiber, a crew working like a heartbeat, lifting river water up and up, feeding channels, soaking soil that's always trying to dry out under a brutal sun. If the hanging gardens were real, they weren't quiet. They were a machine, and machines leave traces. Here's your first clue with a clear takeaway. The gardens are mechanically possible in Babylon, but only if you see them as an expensive, labor-hungry water engine disguised as beauty. You're still in the 6th century before the Common Era, still hemmed in by brick and river, still listening for the grind of that hidden engine behind palace walls. Ask yourself how long a machine like that could run before it carved itself into the records. That's your first hook to keep in mind while you move deeper into the file. Now the second clue steps in, and the case starts to feel stranger. The most detailed descriptions of the Hanging Gardens don't come from Babylonian scribes standing in the courtyard. They talk about terraces, deep soil laid over vaults, and water-lifting devices that sound plausible on a scroll. They don't fully agree on sizes, shapes, or layout. That matters, because it tells you exactly what you're holding. You're not holding a signed blueprint. You're holding a story that traveled. And stories change when they travel, even when they start from something real. You're still in Babylon in the 6th century, but now you're seeing the city through outsider eyes. To them, Babylon is the word for excess, scale, and impossible building. So even if someone once saw or heard about a spectacular royal garden somewhere in Mesopotamia, the strongest magnet for that rumor is Babylon itself. Fame pulls details toward itself until people stop checking the map. Here's your second clue with a clear takeaway. Those later descriptions might preserve a real memory, but Babylon's reputation is powerful enough to swallow other cities' wonders when the paperwork is thin. Right now, you're walking a tightrope between a believable machine and a flexible story. And the next step will decide which side you lean toward. Now you hit the third clue, the one that keeps this mystery alive instead of letting it collapse. Nebuchadnezzar loved building, and he loved taking credit. He stamped his name into bricks and inscriptions so the city itself would repeat him. If he'd built the most famous garden on earth, you'd expect him to brag about it like a crown. Yet when scholars hunt for a clear Babylonian identification of the Hanging Gardens, they keep running into gaps. Not total silence, but not the slam dunk that closes the file. Some storytellers stop here and scream cover up, while others shrug and call the whole thing fake. Both shortcuts are too easy. The smarter move is to ask what that silence could realistically mean in this time and place. You're still in Babylon, by the Euphrates, where scribes write by lamplight and officials hoard records because records are control. Here are 3 grounded ways the city can stay at the center of the story without inventing miracles. First is naming. Maybe the structure existed, but Babylonians never called it the Hanging Gardens. And that label was a later shortcut from outsiders who needed a simple tag. Second is scale. Babylon almost certainly had royal gardens, maybe terraced, impressive enough that visitors talked about them like they were supernatural, and later writers fused scattered impressions into one enormous showpiece. Third is loss. Babylon's made of brick more than stone, and brick cities erode, get stripped for new projects, or drown under shifting rivers, while gardens are built from wood, soil, and plumbing that vanish quietly. A wonder can die in the ground while its reputation grows in the telling. Here's your third clue with a clear takeaway. Babylon's silence doesn't kill the gardens, but it forces you to treat the classic wonder as a legend wrapped around something real, not a perfect architectural snapshot. Right now, you're standing in the gap between what the clay admits and what the later ink insists. That gap is where this mystery really lives. Now the midpoint turn hits, and the case shifts from where is it to why do we need it. The Hanging Gardens aren't just a missing building. They're a wish. People want Babylon to have a paradise, because it's easier to admire an empire if its power can be wrapped in beauty. A garden makes conquest feel gentle, and that's one of history's oldest tricks. Because if the gardens were real, they weren't gentle at all. They were labor turned into scenery. Workers lifting water so someone above them could breathe cool air and call it peace. So when you think of this wonder, don't just see trees. See the hands that kept those trees alive. That's where the story bites. Drop back to street level again. Dust in your mouth, sun pressing down, the smell of animals, smoke, and river mud. Then you step through a palace threshold and hear water running, steady and confident, like the city itself refuses to be dry. Shade wraps around you where shade shouldn't exist. Leaves tremble overhead, the air cools, and for a heartbeat, it feels like someone punched a hole through reality. That feeling's why the Hanging Gardens refuse to die. Even if details blur, the emotional impact's too strong to forget. A green mountain in a land of brick. Life lifted above heat. Water climbing like it's obeying a command. You're still in Babylon in the 6th century, with the Euphrates flowing nearby and the palace district running on lists, labor, and guarded gates. So, what do careful experts tend to say? They don't pretend certainty. They'll tell you Babylon had the wealth, organization, and technical skill to build serious landscape spaces, and that royal gardens in Mesopotamia were real and politically important. They'll also tell you the detailed image of the Hanging Gardens comes mainly from later authors, and the direct Babylonian link you'd love to see is still blurry. So, the cautious view is this. A spectacular garden tradition probably existed here and in Assyria, and the wonder story grew around those realities as it moved through time. You're watching a wonder form across centuries as a real place turns into a symbol. The symbol hardens into a fixed picture, and the picture becomes more real in people's minds than the messy original ever was. In modern terms, it's like a viral image that outlives the complex story behind it, then you're right back in the ancient dust. Here's a detail that pulls you back down. If the gardens were watered day after day, that water had to be lifted by someone, which means the wonder, if it existed, had a hidden workforce built into its roots. You don't get paradise without hands. Every drop on those leaves is a mark of unseen labor. Lock the setting one more time so your mind doesn't drift. You're in Babylon, near the Euphrates, in an age of bronze and iron tools. Reed boats dragging cargo, and messages that take days or weeks to reach another city. Everything here has limits, so a living mountain of green would be a loud announcement, not a quiet decoration. It would say the king can beat climate, beat distance, and bend daily life upright. That leads you to the simplest Babylon-focused explanation that still feels cinematic. The Hanging Gardens were probably not one clean structure we can confirm with a single perfect inscription. They were likely a real royal garden tradition in Babylon, maybe terraced, heavily irrigated, and shocking to outsiders. Over time, the story sharpened into one masterpiece, and that masterpiece was named, polished, and repeated until it turned into a wonder people defended more fiercely than the facts. That version keeps the mystery breathing without pretending the case is closed. It keeps the evidence on the table, and it keeps the emotion, because it makes the gardens feel like a ghost structure you can almost touch, but never fully see. You're still in 6th century Babylon, feeling the tension between what the clay admits and what the legend promises. That tension's exactly what keeps viewers from clicking away. There's one more angle you can't ignore. Babylon's an imperial city pulling resources in from far away, and a garden full of imported trees and endless water isn't just decoration. It's a display of reach and a display of inequality, because most people in Babylon will never live under those leaves. Now you return to the opening mood and close the loop. It's night again. The Euphrates moves under the walls like a slow pulse. Guards shift at the gates, and somewhere behind the palace you imagine water, steady and stubborn, wrong-sounding in a land that doesn't give it away for free. Maybe above the brick there's a terrace where leaves drip into stone channels and the air turns cool. Or maybe that terrace is long gone, stripped and swallowed by time while only the idea hangs on because people refuse to let it fall. Which unsettles you more? A wonder that never existed, or a wonder that did exist but now survives mostly as a perfected story floating above the ruins? Do you think the Hanging Gardens were a real Babylonian masterpiece erased by time, or a legend sharpened from smaller royal gardens into one impossible world wonder? Subscribe if you want more cinematic history mysteries like this. Share this with a friend who loves history. Comment by answering the final question: real masterpiece or perfected legend?